So thank you to all of our sponsors showing up here today. Both those who have graciously offered their time and expertise as presenters here, and also our sponsors are taking time out of our day to tune in for this webinar. While COVID-19 has created an uncertain environment for many, we hope that all of you are staying healthy and well. We do appreciate your continued support and are hopeful for a very exciting provincial rugby season. I'll be your host for the Waikato Rugby Union for the session. My name is Desiree Frisk. I've recently joined Foxy and his team at the WRU about 6 weeks ago as a new sponsorship executive. Unfortunately, I've yet to meet many of you in person with the current COVID environment, but I do look forward to meeting all of you as time permits. To give you an idea of what you can expect from this webinar, each of our panelists will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and at the end, we'll answer any questions you might have. There is a Q&A section that you can feel free to use, put your questions in at any point of the presentation. And what we'll do is at the end of the presenter's time, we'll go through those and we'll try to do our best to answer all of those. There is not going to be any chat, video, or speaking options for you during the webinar. However, this webinar is recorded, so you can watch it again later if you need to step out for a call or even go play a role as a teacher, as many of us have found in our new work-at-home environment. We'll be sending out the recorded webinar link out on social media, so feel free to share it with colleagues and friends also. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our wonderful sponsor family speakers we have here today. First speaker we're going to be having talk today is Sam Hood. Sam is managing partner at Norris Ward McKinnon. They were founded in 1919 here in Hamilton. They serve clientele ranging from individuals all the way through corporations. Sam himself is specialized in civil litigation and employment law. He'll be working on a general overview on good faith obligations across all of the alert levels, and then along with some of the more frequent questions they've been fielding at Norris Ward McKinnon recently. Our second speaker will be Meredith McKenzie. She is a human resource specialist at Everest, All About People. They were founded in 2006. The All About People model really focuses on helping businesses from everything from recruiting employees through workplace culture, coaching, training, and employee support. With 25 years of experience in leadership development and coaching, Meredith will be sharing tips on connecting with employees and good leadership practices. And our final speaker of the day will be Graham Rogers. Graham is the managing director of the Success Group. They was established in 1998. And they offer business support and recruitment services. They do have offices in both Hamilton and Tauranga. Graham is also president of the More Biz Networking Group in Hamilton, along with a variety of other groups across the Waikato. And he'll be sharing his expertise today on safety protocols, plans, grants, and wellness. Sam, would you like to go ahead and take over and start?
Thanks, Desiree. Morning to everyone. And look, just wanted to start by acknowledging the Rugby Union, the Waikato Rugby Union, the strongest, greatest, proudest provincial union in New Zealand. It's great that you've put on this webinar. And it's a privilege for me to tune in and also to share the podium, so to speak, with Everest and Success Group, two iconic Waikato businesses. The topic is strategies in uncertain times, and these certainly are uncertain times. I can't recall ever giving a webinar in a business shirt and a pair of shorts, but there you go. Now, we're finding some real trends in the market, and we're finding these trends in terms of employment law queries coming from our clients, but Norris Ward McKinnon also has a partnership with Federated Farmers, and through that partnership, we host the 0800 Farmers line, which is designed for farmers to phone up and put their queries on various issues, but we're seeing a real trend in terms of certain employment law topics. And I want to touch on some of those topics today in the short time that I have, and you can take it from me that these sorts of topics, they're not just random topics we're getting from some people. We're fielding hundreds of phone calls a week, and so the topics we'll cover in very brief terms will be some of the most relevant topics and that we're questions we're being asked, and they'll probably hopefully resonate with some of the things that you've got going as well. Before I touch on those topics, I might start at a higher level, and the reason for that is that this theme selected by the Waikato Rugby Union is on strategies, and so rather than delving into the detail of the particular fires that employers need to fight on a regular basis, I want to start at that high level strategic level because that's the chosen topic, and because the best way to navigate the fires and the pitfalls of employment law is to understand at a high level those key principles. So I'm going to start by just touching on the nature of the employment relationship and the duty of good faith. And once I've gone onto that and covered some ground there, I'll then apply that duty and those principles to some of those scenarios that we're seeing in the marketplace. So if I look across all the problems employers can face and all the challenges, it's clear to me that understanding the nature of the employment relationship and understanding and complying with the duty of good faith is the best strategy I can think of to help navigate through these uncertain times. So what is the nature of the employment relationship? Well, the employment relationship, first and foremost, it's a contract. And so we don't often think of those relationships in contractual terms, but the employer has contractual obligations to the employee and vice versa. And one of those fundamental obligations as a matter of contract is the principle that you can't vary the terms of the contract without the consent of the other contracting party. And that principle applies in employment law as well. So thinking of employment relationships as contractual obligations, as contracts in the same way that you have contracts with other people, is a good starting point. Probably the biggest difference and the thing that defines employment relationships in particular are these underlying statutory duties. So these are the duties that apply to every employment relationship, regardless of what the parties may negotiate, and they're found in legislation like the Health and Safety and Employment Act, or Health and Safety at Work Act now, the Employment Relations Act, the Holidays Act, and the list goes on. One of those fundamental duties is the duty of good faith. And if there's nothing that you take away from my little presentation other than maybe a deeper understanding of the duty of good faith, then that would be a success. So the duty of good faith is a duty that applies for every single employment relationship, and it applies in all aspects of the employment relationship, and it especially applies when an employer proposes to make a decision that may have an adverse effect on an employee's employment. And so the duty of good faith, it just basically it's sort of is what it sounds like. It's being reasonable, it's being responsive and communicative, it's maintaining a successful employment relationship. It's a duty that applies both ways. I think sometimes some employees possibly forget that they also have a duty of good faith to an employer. But the key take-home point is that whenever an employer is proposing to do anything that's likely to have an adverse effect on an employee's employment, then the employer needs to do two things. And the first thing is the employer needs to provide the affected employee with all information relevant to that proposed decision. And the second thing that an employer needs to do is to give the employee an opportunity to comment on that information and on that proposed decision before actually making the decision. And I've found pre-COVID and even through COVID that employers often don't understand the extent of the need not only to consult with employees, but to give sufficiently relevant information before they make the decision. And I see that duty get breached all the time, and it's a massive area of risk to employers. But that's the duty of good faith. If you're ever going to make a decision that's going to impact on someone, give them all information that relates to that decision and give them an opportunity to comment before you make that decision. And if employers go forward with a better understanding of the duty of good faith in mind, then that for me is the best strategy for managing all the uncertain things that COVID will throw your way. And let's face it, employment law is always changing, and every change of government, you seem to get new changes anyway. So one thing you can count on in employment law is there'll constantly be change and constantly uncertainty. I want to talk now about some of those issues that we're seeing through our clients and through the Federated Farmers phone line. And the first issue we're seeing is variations to employees' wages without consent. This is a common theme where employers are so focused on the business implications of the lockdown, and fair enough, that they think they can just vary the employees' wages without consent. And we're seeing lack of consultation. We're seeing some situations where the variations happen to someone's wages without any sort of business information being provided. We see staff being required to take annual leave without any form of consultation or consent. But the main take-home principle here is that because you're dealing with a contract, you can't just change the terms of the contract without someone else's consent. And that applies to employment relationships, employment agreements, as well as commercial contracts. So the best way to vary someone's wages is to actually consult with them and seek their consent. And if they refuse their consent, then there's nothing you can do about it in terms of varying their wages. But there are other scenarios you can look to, and one of the obvious ones is redundancy. So just to recap, variation to wages without consent, seeing that a lot. One alternative is requiring staff to take annual leave. You can only do that once you've consulted, and you've got to give them 14 days notice as well. So there are some measures available to respond to the financial implications of COVID, but simply reducing someone's salary to 80% or even to the wage subsidy without their consent is not one of them, unless you want a personal grievance. So the second common theme we're seeing, of course, is redundancies. Now, redundancies, it's a little bit different to reducing someone's salary because you're not actually altering the terms of an employment agreement. You're actually potentially ending the employment relationship. And you don't need an employee's consent, obviously, to make them redundant, but you do need to follow those good faith duties. And the key things with the redundancy, and these requirements haven't actually changed, they're pre-COVID requirements and they remain requirements. And the first is that an employer needs to have a genuine commercial reason for disestablishing a position. And I don't have time to go into what a genuine commercial reason is, other than the financial constraints caused by the lockdown as an obvious commercial reason. And then the second thing an employer needs to do is make sure that they follow a proper process. Now, this is where those good faith obligations really come to the fore, because if you just bear in mind that the good faith duty requires providing all relevant information and an opportunity to comment, then you'll see that in a restructure proposal, if the business case for redundancy is based on the drop in revenue from the lockdown, then in order to make someone redundant, an employer acting in good faith needs to disclose all information relevant to the business case and then provide the employee with an opportunity to comment. There are lots of pitfalls along the way in making someone redundant. Excuse me. And it's definitely best to get legal advice before you decide to go down a process. One of the biggest things we're finding in the lockdown is that because of the availability of the wage subsidy, it's actually harder for an employer to justify a redundancy. And employers who receive the wage subsidy will have filled out a declaration that they'll use their best endeavours to keep staff on at 80%. And so filling up that declaration means it's harder, but not impossible to make someone redundant. The key thing with redundancies is if you're going to go down that path, you need to explore alternatives to redundancy. And one of the most obvious alternatives is retaining staff on at 80% of their wages. You'll obviously need their consent to go to 80% for the period of 12 weeks of the subsidy. And then at the end of the subsidy, potentially looking at a restructure then or redundancy then. It's a hard argument to disestablish people's positions when there's a wage subsidy available. Now, I've seen that in one case, and the one case I've seen that is a case where the reason for the redundancy was actually pre-COVID stuff, and just purely from a matter of timing, the redundancy didn't happen until during the lockdown. And in that situation, the employer obviously has to pass on the subsidy to staff. So the main take home there is that COVID-19 and the lockdown hasn't changed the principles behind redundancies, the need to consult. In some ways, it's made it easier for employers to have a business case to make people redundant. But because an employer needs to explore alternatives to redundancy, then there will be an expectation that employers perhaps retain people at 80% or whatever they negotiate and pay the wage subsidy, and at the end of the 12-week period, maybe reassess the situation. That's not a hard and fast rule. Employers are free to ultimately make their own commercial decisions, subject to those decisions being scrutinised if an employee raises a personal grievance. Just in the last remaining time before we hand over to Meredith and Graham, a third issue we're seeing quite often is employees breaching the lockdown requirements. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but this is quite obvious at alert level 4 when an employee is breaching the lockdown rules. It's going to become less obvious at alert level 3. And the solution in those situations, of course, is first and foremost education. It's talking with employees, and if the situation is sufficiently serious where disciplinary action is needed, that's fine. But just bear in mind that with a duty of good faith, whenever you're taking disciplinary action, you're proposing to make a decision that may have an adverse effect on someone's employment. And so that's when those obligations to give the person information relevant to that decision, as well as a chance to comment before you make that decision. The fourth issue that's become quite common is employees who don't feel safe returning to work. And that issue can be dealt with quite simply. If someone's not able to work because they're choosing not to work and you as an employer have taken all reasonable steps to provide a safe work environment, then there's no obligation to pay an employee who won't return to work. So the key thing again there is just to talk it through with them and consult and maybe look to alternatives. If they're not prepared to come to work, then maybe you can look to give them some form of discretionary leave. That's not essential, it's up to you, it's consensual. Or you can maybe negotiate usage of the annual leave. But the key point is if they are deciding not to come to work when you've taken all reasonable steps to provide a safe work environment, then that's on them and there's no obligation to pay them. The fifth and final scenario I wanted to cover off is just managing or staffing the workplace, your workforce, when you've got people who might be away from work for either they're vulnerable people, so they're not at work, or maybe you've got migrant workers who can't return to the country, or we're seeing people who can't go to work because of the travel restrictions. And so in some industries, they're actually having gaps in the workplace or in the workforce. And the two most obvious ways to fill those gaps is through the use of casual staff, and secondly, through fixed term staff. Now, my final comment, I suppose, is that the use of casual staff is possibly the most abused area of employment law that I've encountered. And I've seen many situations where an employee signs up as a casual employee because they are purely only working a day here and a day there. But lo and behold, it all becomes very convenient. And next thing you know, the casual employee's been working for 6 months, 4 days a week, some weeks, 5 days a week, some weeks. And what's actually happened is that legally they've become most likely a permanent employee, but they haven't received all their minimum entitlements. And so that opens up an area of risk to an employer. And then when the employer decides not to engage the casual employee because they consider their casual employment, the person's then been dismissed unjustifiably and has a personal grievance. And so I think utilising casual and fixed term employees in the lockdown is a great tool as long as it's managed properly. Look, Desiree, that's all I wanted to cover. Look, there are all sorts of issues that arise from time to time and will continue to do so both in the lockdown and after the lockdown. If employers are just cognizant of that duty of good faith and really understand it and follow it, then that's the best strategy I can think of for managing those potential pitfalls. Now, if you're happy to take any questions, if you need any more information, then the Norris Ward Mackinnon website has a number of articles on these topics. LinkedIn, we're producing regular videos for federated farmers, so LinkedIn is a great way of tuning in and seeing videos from more accomplished presenters than myself, than who actually are on the front line of the phone line and actually can give further, hopefully, light and guidance. But that's all I had. Desiree, is there anything you wanted to ask, or anything you wanted me to cover besides what I've covered so far?
No, I think that's great, Sam. We'll go ahead and turn over to Meredith, and we are having some questions come in, so we'll answer those at the end of the session here.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam, and thanks for this opportunity. I'm just going to share my screen. Right, just checking, can everyone see just the one Everest page? Is that what's showing up for you? Okay, cool. So I just wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about staying connected with your team. So this is not focusing on employment law, but it's within the context of our obligations as fair and reasonable employers, good faith obligations. So just thinking about the situation for employers, but it applies to employees either, acknowledging how you personally are feeling and the stress that you're under and the the stuff you're dealing with at home as well as at work, and the uncertainty. So check in with yourself. How are you feeling on that? And the other question is, which of my screens is showing up? Can I just ask that question? Is it the one that's got the Q&A showing, or just my one?
I can see both of them, Meredith.
You can see both of them? Okay, I've got the wrong screen showing. So, right, is that better?
It's better.
Okay, my apologies for that. The joys of working with two screens. So checking in with yourself, how are you feeling? But also, do you know how your team are feeling? In being aware of those factors and what you might be dealing with as you start getting the team back to work. Oh, and now my screen's not clicking forward. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so some of the things that you're going to be facing are uncertainty. And I mean, that's a reality for all of us. We have no idea what's going to happen in terms of level changes yet, and we're starting to see some really positive trends in the very low numbers of COVID-19. So that's fantastic and helps resolve some of that uncertainty, but it's not definite yet. And international trends are different from ours. We just don't know. There's a lot of anxiety, and that's completely understandable, and people react to it very, very differently. There's also a lot of financial stress. For employers, massive financial stress if there's been no income or uncertainty of funding, or just not knowing when you're going to be able to open the doors again, or what it's going to cost you to shift to an online and click and collect model. There's also family stress. So that could be from just living on your own for the last 4 weeks, or living with teenagers for the last 4 weeks. It's going to provide a bit of stress for a few people. Living with small children and having to be teacher when that's not your primary role. Also, for those who have elderly parents and are facing either the challenge of having them in the house with you, which can be really good, but also, let's face it, can be challenging. Or those elderly relatives are far enough away that you can't go and visit them and help them out, and they might be on their own, or they might be facing situations there. So just be really aware of those stresses that you and your team might be under. And then, of course, cabin fever, if you have been stuck inside. Some of us are lucky enough to have a big section or a lifestyle block or a farm we can get outside and do things. Other people are in much smaller apartments with a lot of people. So there's some factors there that it's absolutely worth being aware of. So what I want to just dwell on for a moment is those leadership factors. If you're an employer or you're a manager of a team, here are some things that can help you and the team rebuild as you go forward. The first one is to listen, which often requires asking questions associated with it, but listen to what your team's feeling, listen to how they're responding to the information you're giving, pay attention to what they're saying, and actually acknowledge the stuff that they talk about. If they are facing things, for example, they're wanting to not come back to work for a valid reason, they've got small children at home and they don't want to send them back to school yet. Government has told them to keep the kids at home, so how can they return to work when they've got kids at home? So there's some genuine challenges that go with that. The other ones that I'm seeing with various clients are people who are actually vulnerable. They have medical conditions themselves and have been told up to this point, you need to stay home. And the other one is people who have vulnerable people in the house. So the employee themselves is fine, but they have someone in their house with a respiratory condition, so they're just very worried about bringing the virus home. There is light at the end of the tunnel on those ones, in that there's a whole lot of evidence that no community spread is going on. Fantastic. Number of cases is going way down. There's a lot more confidence in the health and safety measures that we're taking. So a number of people who've been too scared so far to go back to work, if you have a decent conversation with them, listen to their concerns and work through each one of them, you may be able to help them understand that it's safe to come back now to the best of your ability. And that's Graham's going to talk specifically about that stuff. Okay, so that's listening. The next one is inform, and do whatever you can to keep people up to date with what are you doing in your business, what are your plans, what is the next stage as far as you know, going forward, things like that. If you are having to make big changes, okay, so the consultation stuff that goes with changing people's hours or wages or actual job, inform with as much information as you can. It doesn't mean you need to give them insight into every single financial aspect of your business. And it definitely doesn't mean that you give people access to what other people earn. Okay, so there's some things that are still private and confidential, and you need to respect those boundaries, but you can share information in general, high level stuff. So, this is our expenses excluding salary are this percentage of the business, or this many dollars in big terms, and our wage bill is this, and so we want to try and reduce it by 20%, or we need to reduce everyone's else. Whatever you need to do, try and share that kind of information, even if it's at a high level. Then the next one I've got there is to flex. So work out what your boundaries are, what you need to do legally or for the sake of your business, and then see where there's possibility of flex within that. So can people do some aspects of their work from home and then just share the other aspects with those who can return to the workplace? What can you do that gives a little bit more flexibility and acceptance of variation within your team for this period of time? And one thing to be aware of is if you do that, and if it's genuinely temporary, it's not a long-term option, then be clear with your team about that. For this period of time, we're willing to do this level of flex and change, but it's not forever, and we are going to review it because it's just not an option for a long-term scenario besides survival of the business. And the last one, just so that it turned out to be life instead of life, encourage your team. Okay, find ways to encourage yourself and your team when you do get big wins, when you have opportunities, even when someone has something happen in their family. Talk about those things and get some encouragement going. Okay, know yourself. Okay, if you're a very people-oriented person and you're empathetic and you're good at having these conversations, fantastic. If you're the task-driven person and you're very focused on getting things done and the numbers and all that kind of stuff, and actually dealing with people is quite hard for you, is there someone else in your team who you can involve in these conversations? Is there someone that you can say, I want to have a discussion about this, can you just tell me if I'm going to handle it right? Or can you just sit beside me and kick me if I say the wrong thing? Use the people around you if you find that, if you're aware that you're not necessarily the most empathetic person in the world. Just know yourself in those situations. And then some practicalities. Here's some thoughts. Just tip my, oh, that didn't work very well. Okay, propose solutions and accept ideas. So the concept of good faith around consultation is to propose ideas, see what people say, and see whether you can incorporate any of those ideas at all. If you can't, try and explain why. But I would say from any situation, not just COVID-19, if an employee comes to you with an idea and you straight away go, no, we don't do that, then that is very destructive to your employment relationship. Whereas if you can say, okay, not sure about that, can we work out what you're trying to achieve and can we achieve it another way? And see what you can do. And as you're working through scenarios and things, see if you can actually put ideas to the team. Here's what I'm thinking of doing. What do you think? Is this a good idea? Could we do it better? See what you can get involvement from your team. Check in frequently and with everyone. So make sure you don't miss. If you've got some of your team back and some of them still working at home or not available because they're vulnerable, have kids, whatever, see if you can find ways to include everybody in your discussions, or at least involve, have the discussion with that person afterwards if they can't be at the meeting. Accept some level of productivity variation. Okay, when people are stressed and anxious and dealing with family issues or financial issues, they're probably not going to be as productive as usual. So work out how much variation you're willing to put up with in there, and work out, is it temporary or is it ongoing? Can you support these people in another way? But that doesn't mean you have to accept people doing no work whatsoever when they're being paid, or doing crap work. So technical term there, not quite meeting your standards. So if they're not meeting your standards, have the conversation, work out what's going on for them, and then work out, is this something you need to deal with right now, or something that you can give them a little bit of space on and then get going on your performance management stuff. We've had calls from a number of clients who had performance management issues building up before the situation, and now of course they've really gone wrong, and we're just working through, is now the time to deal with this, or do we give people a little bit of space and clear expectations and then move forward on performance improvement plans or disciplinary processes, whatever. Just pick your battles at this moment. And the other thing that goes with that is, are you in the right headspace to deal with this right now? Communicate a lot, often and repeatedly, and if you sound like a stuck record, or that's how you feel, then you're probably doing it about right. So it takes more effort to communicate at these kind of times when there's a lot of anxiety and people are in different places. Just keep repeating the stuff that you need to repeat. Plan for multiple scenarios. Okay, so now we have a degree of certainty that we're going to drop to level 3 next week. Fantastic. Now we can start planning whatever is appropriate for your organisation, your business, but we don't yet know when level 2 is coming. We don't yet know when the borders are going to open and we're going to get international tourists back in, if that's your industry. So you may need to plan multiple scenarios. What are you going to do if the borders are shut for a year? What are you going to do if we end up back in level 4? Even further, really hoping that doesn't happen. What are you going to do if we're only in level 3 for 2 weeks and then we're at level 2? How's that going to go? And then if it's all looking so fantastic that we're back on board, how are you going to manage that with your workforce? And what are you going to do with a return to work plan for if you've got a big team? Are they all coming back at once? Are they all coming back on short hours? Are they coming back in teams depending on what they did before? Yeah, have some scenarios there. Ask for help. If you need it, ask for it. That's on personal level, but also employment law matters, health and safety matters, consultation matters, business support matters. So if your business is under 50 people, then there is funding available through Te Waka for business support, whether that's HR or other scenario planning or business planning. So there is some funding available there. So if you need help, ask for it. If you're not sure if you need help, ask for it anyway, and the person at the other end can say, yeah, actually you're fine, or no, here's what I can do to help along the way. And the other one, last one I'd put in there is get enough sleep. That is going to be really critical to help you get through, but also to help your employees get through and handle things appropriately. So here we go. And I'm going to unshare my screen so that we can get back to everybody. Cool. Thanks, Desiree.
Thanks, Meredith. Awesome. And last but not least, we've got Graham from Success Group.
Good morning, everyone. And thanks again to Desiree and the Waikato Rugby Union for being able to put this on. I think with the strategies that's the theme of this presentation, it's a compliment to Desiree for implementing the strategy of trying to get all of the sponsors together and to be able to hopefully start the season off, the NPC season, Mitre 10 Cup, with a hiss and a roar, with all of the sponsors on board, as well as that stadium behind you, Sam. We hope to see that full. So let's hope that's the way it works. So what I'd like to cover this morning is something that needs to be in place for a return to work. You've probably found that there's a lot of people giving different sorts of advice. Sam touched on some of the issues and the questions that he gets coming in from the Federated Farmers and from his clients. There's a number of websites around as far as health and safety is concerned. There's WorkSafe, there's CHASNS, which is the Construction Health and Safety New Zealand website. That's got a number of really interesting and informative templates that you can use. Just be careful though, if you search for the CHASNS site, make sure you put the S, because apparently CHANZ is a casino site, but CHASNZ is the health and safety site. So just make sure you enter the website address correctly. With the return to work, one of the things that you've got to do, or the first thing you've got to do is what's known as a triple SP, which is a site-specific safety plan. Each work site will have to have one, and you'll have to make sure that any other company that you're interacting with has got their own, and that yours matches with theirs, and that you work within them as well. So I'll cover just some of the things that need to be in those plans and how you implement them. With return to work, there's extra PCBU requirements. So everybody who has a business, of course, you're the person in charge of the business or undertaking. So there's extra requirements on you now, and also on the employees to make sure that they adhere to the regulations and documents that have been put in place. When you go back to work, just make sure that it's safe. There's things like expired warrants, tags and testing. Make sure nobody's been on your site while you've been away. Check for any insurance claims that may have to be made. Any plant and equipment that needs to be serviced, make sure that's all done. Toilet facilities is a big thing. Make sure that your site plan allows for toilet cleaning, how often it's going to be done, who gets access to it. If you're visiting other people's premises, what's the toilet facilities and protocol there? Now, the 1 metre distancing that's allowed within level 3 has been allowed because the contact tracing and details that are kept and records that are kept of who you're in contact with during the day allows then, if there's a incident of COVID down the track, you can get in touch with the people that you've been around. And that's why they've reduced the 2 metre physical distancing down to 1 metre for level 3. So that's another big thing you're going to have to keep there, is all the records of where you've been, who you've been in touch with, sign-in register and sign-out registers. There's different information from different industry groups. There's some groups have been saying that if Sam and Meredith, for example, turn up on Tuesday and they're working in a team on a particular project, then they have to stay in that same team for the next 2 weeks. There's other workplaces where that's not quite practical, but it comes back to your site plan and also the guidance given by your particular industry group. It's frustrating to see that there's different opinions being given, but in the environment that we've got at the moment and with the speed that it's come in place, as Sam has said with the employment situation as well, sometimes there hasn't been a set guideline as to this is right and this is wrong. Vulnerable workers, the definition of vulnerable has been expanded quite a bit. So you've got your heart and respiratory issues, but then there's also age. Obesity has been brought into the vulnerable workers, and diabetes, liver, kidney disease, all of those have been deemed as being vulnerable workers. And as Meredith said, not only the ones that are coming in your workforce, but if they've got anybody at home that may be in that category as well. So you've got to be careful how you're going to handle those vulnerable workers, and also make sure that you're staying on the right side of any discrimination that may happen because of that. Be aware that the work will be slower. Now, there are some situations where variations have been allowed for contracts that may take longer, for work situations that may require distancing that means you can't get it done in the same time frame. So check your contract. There may be allowance for variations, which will allow for extra payment for that. The WorkSafe website, as I said, and the Chasn's website, your own industry website, check on all those. And because we're coming into winter at this time of year and projects may carry on a little bit further into wet weather than what they have in previous years, there may be a need to identify any further hazards that might be in that sort of area as well. Just with personal hygiene, and that's one of the things that will be covered in the safety plan, there's been advice from WorkSafe that as far as clothing is concerned, machine washing doesn't really get hot enough for the, if you go from cold to hot, that's not quite warm enough to completely clean your clothing. And also line drying as opposed to machine drying is an area that they advise as well, as far as being able to wash your clothes. So if you come home from work, you're meant to be removing the clothing that you wear during the day. And before you go back into your bubble, have an extra set of clothing that you can get into. So your site plan, that covers 5 specific areas. There's staff management prior to arriving on site, entry to the site, working during the day, leaving site, and then your emergency management plan. So I'll run through some of the things that you might want to address in your plan, and also make sure that the plan that you're looking at on the site that you're going to has similar information in it. First of all, and it's a big thing too, as Meredith said, the wellness of people coming back to work, both physically and mentally. It's not a situation that many people have been through before. And coming back into the workplace, they may need for the first half day just to talk. Don't expect them to come back and sit at their desk or behind their bench or whatever they're doing and get ramped up to the way that they were before. It may just not happen. So mental and physical wellness too. Just be aware of that. Tags and test and tags, the warrants, your electrical equipment, anything that you've got on site there. Make sure that's all up to stage, and expect a staged ramp up, not just for you, but for your suppliers. I don't know, you might have the stationary person dropping something in, or you might have materials on site. They've got to be aware of what your plan is. You've got to be aware of what their plan is. And then once you're on site, you've got to have a sign-in register. So you make sure where your staff are. They've got to give their details, their phone number, and the Privacy Act is something you've got to keep in mind here. And Sam might take some questions afterwards on that. But what you do with the records that you keep, how long you keep them for, and where you store them. We've got one client who says that if anybody's coming on site, there's to be no more than 2 people in a car arriving, and the people in the car must be living in the same site. If there's any more than 2, or if anybody coughs in the car, then everybody else stays home for a fortnight. The rules and regulations that they're putting in place, because they're working around a retirement village, is quite strict. So it might not seem practical or reasonable for others, but that's what they've got. That's what we must adhere to. PPE. Guidance has been coming through from a lot of industry bodies that masks are to be discouraged as opposed to encouraged. The reason for that is not everybody knows how to use them. If they're used all day, the moisture that might be in them is actually counterproductive to the protection that they're meant to offer in the first place. So masks aren't always required. Gloves, again, they can be okay, but you've got to know how to use them. I've seen people driving around in cars wearing gloves. I don't know what that was meant to do. It's meant to transfer what they've got at home back into the workplace or what. So yeah, if you're going to give PPE to your employees or your staff, give a bit of training at the same time and just work out whether or not it's practical. Touch points, be aware of touch points in the workplace, and that can be anything from handrails, computer screens, keyboards, anything like that. What's your cleaning process? What's your cleaning regime? Is it going to be common or communal areas that they're in? The hand washing. Make sure your hand washing and hand drying facilities are available. So you might have all the water, the taps, the sink bench, all that to wash your hands, but drying is just as important as what the washing is. So towels regularly cleaned or replaced, and or the tissues. The smoking and vaping. Guidance has come from the Ministry of Health that the smoking and vaping, exhaling that happens, can be a method of communication of COVID as well. So just be a little bit more aware of that. And interregional travel. When you're traveling from one place to another for work, are you interregional? There's guidance from Ministry of Health as to how you must stay within your region. So just plan for that ahead of time. And then leaving site. So leaving site, you've got the same hygiene processes as before. The washing, hand washing, making sure PPE is left on site if it's going to be used the next day and doesn't need to be cleaned, or is it going to be cleaned by the cleaners around the area. The sign out sheets, make sure that they are all sign in, sign out, and then your vehicles. Make sure that people are traveling home in the same vehicle that they arrived in. You don't want sharing of vehicles, that sort of thing. And an emergency management plan. What's going to happen if you do have an outbreak or a case of COVID on your workplace? What are you going to do as far as the next day is concerned? Who do you contact? How do you track down everybody that's been there? All that's got to be in the site plan as well. Now, all of these plans must be available for your workers to see as soon as they come on site or into your office. And they've got to be able to be explained to MB, either when MB rings up or comes in through the door. So who have you got there that can explain it to everyone? As far as construction is concerned, which is what the focus on return to level 3 is, there's encouraging signs from government as far as wanting to push these forward. They've asked for all councils around the country to prepare a list of what might be shovel ready and or hammer ready. And Hamilton City Council's put through 24 projects, I think, that they regard as being ready and able to start straight away. So I think as far as this industry is concerned, construction and manufacturing, we're reasonably comfortable that the workload should be there for at least the next 6 or 7 months. We've had a hard few weeks. It's not something that we've been through before, but the future is looking reasonably promising. I think as long as we stay positive, stick to the rules, make sure that all of the regulations and legislation is followed appropriately, we should get through it. And this time next year, we'll be looking forward to the start of another NPC with Waikato holding the Ranfurly Shield.
We are definitely all hoping for that one. So everyone stay healthy and clean out there so we can play some rugby this season. As far as our Q&A, we only had one question come in that Sam went ahead and offered, answered through the chat feature. So if anybody else has any questions for our panelists, if you want to flick those in through the Q&A really quick here. Otherwise, unless any of the panelists have anything to add now at the end of, I've heard everyone else talk, is there any pieces that you guys missed or want to add in? No? Wonderful. There we go, Graham. Wonderful. Well, with no other questions, I just want to say thank you to our panelists. Really appreciate all of you for coming in and sharing your time. Again, this is Sam from Norris Ward McKinnon, Meredith from Everest All About People, and Graham from the Success Group. If you are watching this presentation recorded and interested in becoming part of the WRU sponsor family, please feel free to contact myself. My contact information will be in the platform that you're watching this in. So wonderful. I hope everyone has a safe entry into level 3, and we see you all back out for some good union football in the provinces soon here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Have a good day.